Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Garner from Hornet, and we're so happy that you could join us for these segments that we're creating for AIDS 2020 virtual conference. Today, we're having a discussion about queer migrants and HIV. This is a topic that is very complex and spans the entire globe. We're going to try and condense some of the key points and experiences into this short conversation. So I'm going to introduce each participant and have them describe a little bit about themselves and the work that they do. And I'll start first with Oscar.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Oscar Lopez. I work and live on the US-Mexican border in Texas. It's a rural community that spans from the city of Brownsville all the way towards Mission. And if you look at it on the map, it's larger than Connecticut and New Hampshire combined. We have 1.2 million people that we're responsible for, and there's only one AIDS service organization for this whole region. And we are also home to all the mistreatment that you've heard so much about in the last year and a half of migrant children separated from their families, kept in cages, forever displaced from their parents. So unfortunately, that's part of our sad reality.
Thanks, Oscar. So let's move a little bit south to Jose.
Hello. Thank you, Alex and Hornet, for the invitation for Red Somos. I'm Jose Fernando Salcedo Martinez. I'm political scientist and also the project and political incidents professional from Red Somos. Red Somos is a 13 years old or a community-based organization. We work in issues about diversity, about sexual diversity, about community effort and estrangement, and also about migrants, because we base in Bogota, Colombia, but also we are in a network with many organizations around Colombia who are working with migrants from Venezuela, because the humanitarian crisis is very, very high, and also it's very complex. For that reason, we are an organization who has experience working with HIV and also sex and also reproductive and sexual health, and since focus in community attention. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jose. And moving across the pond, if you will, to Edwin.
Yes, as you mentioned, my name is Edwin Sanger. I work with African Equality Foundation and Outmate Counseling, Training and Support Services. We are based in London, but we work across the UK. So the first organization, which is African Equality Foundation, we support LGBT asylum seekers and refugees, plus migrants. Outmate Counseling, Training and Support Services, we give mental health support to refugees, asylum seekers, and people from range of backgrounds. So basically, during COVID, we've been working in partnership, and most of our work's been done together. We've been working collaboratively.
Great. Thanks so much, Edwin. I think part of the issue of migrants and then the intersecting issues around LGBT and HIV, there are so many competing priorities. But I think part of better understanding the issue is understanding how people and organizations like yours are directly addressing the unique issues that LGBT migrants face when it comes to health and HIV. And Jose, I'd like to start with you, and partly because one, I was fortunate enough to be in Bogota last year and I know the great work that Tomos has been doing. And also in Colombia, the right to healthcare is written into your constitution. And so I'm curious if that is at all helpful when we talk about this issue. So how about we start there, and if you can sort of highlight some of the unique issues that LGBT people face in Colombia and coming from Venezuela and other places, and how your organization deals with that.
Well, thank you, Alex. Well, I guess that in first time we have to contextualize a little bit about the situation of migrant people from Venezuela. We are facing a unique humanitarian crisis, never see in this way for America, Latin America. Just compare with the migration from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua to the United States. So now in Colombia, there's about 1,018,000 people migrant from Venezuela. According to the numbers, just 60% of just 40% of the migrants are regular migrants, and the 60% are not regular. In this way, from Red Somos, we are working for trying to attend integrally the migrant people and the migrant people LGBTQ, because it's a stigma, it's a triple stigma, because are many people are migrant and also LGBTQ, who belongs are LGBTQ, and also are people who are living with HIV or AIDS. In that order of ideas, we try to use the rights action. We try to empower the people to make the regularization to 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 obtain the attention for the system of health. In this moment, we have to reference that the juridical and political system in Venezuela is totally different to the Colombian one. For that reason, many migrants, when they get into Colombia, they face a reality that the system in Colombia is totally different, and they have to assure themselves and also get into the regularization for obtain the service of health. In this way, for that reason, Red Somos have has created a, an integral protocol to attend the migrants in regularization, access to health, social work, humanitarian aid, and also all the services who needs the migrant to try to they understand how the system, the health system in Colombia works.
Thanks, Jose. I think part of the challenge for migrants globally is that there still isn't agreement upon whether or not there's a fundamental right to healthcare. And so, Oscar, the question that I would pose to you is sort of how do migrants, if possible, even access healthcare or HIV services if on the border, and certainly in the US, there's no sense that migrants have the right to healthcare? What are some of the things that you do to ensure that they'll get treatment or prevention, even in the unique position they find themselves
Thank you. I wish I lived in Colombia after hearing Jose speak. No, you're right. Our migrants don't have the right to healthcare or many rights, if any. And we've seen that in our case, in our country, we've had to keep going to the Supreme Court to fight for the release of migrants, for better treatment of them. During this COVID epidemic, they've still been kept in cages, mass amounts of them with no masks, no running water, no soap. Even the guards who are responsible for them haven't been issued the protective gear they need. So it speaks to how not only the Latinos behind the cage, but the Latinos in front of the cage tasked with protecting the country are not cared for by our current administration. Um, 1 out of every 4 new infections in the United States that happen within Latino communities is a migrant or immigrant person. And we are the only population, Latinos are, that has seen an increase, a tremendous increase in HIV cases compared to other minority groups. So what we do is once they're released, if they came into the country illegally, if we have to use that term, it is that they're given access to any medical services they need, whether it's HIV and STI testing. If they come back for something being positive, we will treat it immediately and link them into care potentially for their lifetime if it's HIV. The issue isn't that we aren't willing to or able to provide that service once they're here. It's that we also live in an area that after you drive about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours away from the border, there's a checkpoint. And it's surrounded by almost desert ranch land. So you can't walk across it. You have to be in a vehicle or you'll die out in the wilderness. And you can't get past that checkpoint if you're not a US citizen. So everybody who comes here is trapped here indefinitely. And again, with only one ASO in the region, that's a big issue. We had more new positives the last 2 years in our region than Kentucky, Georgia, did for the entire state, and yet we got less funding than all of them. So there's not a lot we can do about that at the moment, except to continue to advocate. But
I think
anything we can do as individuals and as we organize the community is the community response to helping the migrant population and even the asylum seekers that are being forced to stay in Mexico under horrific conditions. We will do. We've raised thousands of dollars locally to feed them, up to 3,000 people twice a day. Our teachers go on Sundays and teach Escuelita en la Banqueta. They teach school to the various kids because they've been out of school and kept in a barbed wire fence area encampment for over a year with no end in sight.
So Oscar, thanks so much. I think that there is a continuing need to really shine a light on what's happening on the southern border in the US. It's gone out of the media. People don't really talk about it much anymore. COVID has certainly eclipsed it in some ways, even though COVID is having a profound impact on that population. There's all these intersecting issues around HIV and being LGBT. And so part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because we can never have too many of these conversations about migration, and it seems to be the one global issue that is having an enormous impact everywhere people are.
Sure.
I'm curious.
Can I add one quick thing though?
Very quick.
That trans Latinas that are escaping Venezuela are the one group that we are most often alarmed by the challenges they face, the violence they have faced in their home countries. So they're not only fleeing the lack of economy and jobs, or the lack of food because of the what's going on in the environment, but they're fleeing for their lives because if they don't leave their home country, they will be exploited, forced into prostitution, murdered, etc. So then they take this arduous trip to the border here in Texas, again, being susceptible to all that violence. And when they get here, they're thrown into an encampment that is not user-friendly. And not only they, but the gay, lesbian, bisexual, other members of the community have been asking for support because they feel so isolated, so much that they can't open up and say who they really are or who they love, because of any violence that might occur in the encampment. Once they cross over, the first thing we do is get them on a bus, get them a credit card with some food money for food and needed necessities, and we ship them to Houston, because at least Houston has trans Latina LGBT friendly shelters. There's nothing like that, and that
Thanks.
Houston's 8 hours away.
Thanks, Oscar. That's such an important point. And Jose, I see your hand up. 1 second, I just want to go to Edwin really fast, because I think that we're talking about two different cases that are literally physically on a border, and in the UK, you're far removed from many of those borders. So I'm curious, Edwin, sort of how that impacts the sort of experience of people who find themselves in London and in the UK and are migrants and are struggling to either access healthcare or find a community.
Thank you so much, Alex. In the UK, HIV treatment is free. Everybody can access it. But, there's a very big but. People suffer from loss of illnesses, including HIV. So HIV is just one of them, but it's free, that's a good thing. But when it comes to migrants, to access NHS, if you on other visas, which say student, discretionary leave to remain, you have to pay a surcharge to access NHS. Remember, NHS is free, but for other services, you have to pay to renew your visa. So there's a surcharge. It's going to increase in October to 640 every year. But then when it comes to asylum seekers and undocumented people, you can't access NHS apart from accessing HIV support. So you have to register with a GP, and then you get NHS number, and then you get into other services. But there is a chance that if you go to hospital, we've had cases where some people have been reported, and if you've accessed NHS, other NHS services without your legal status to stay in the UK, you can be charged. They can fine you like sums of money. So there is that problem for those who haven't got legal status to live in the UK. Now, when it comes to other issues that migrants face in relationship to HIV, there's so much stigma from some politicians, and even within the community. We've had politicians like Nigel Farage and others who go on to say that they are coming here to access HIV treatment. Actually, some statistics disagree with Nigel Farage because some migrants actually are more likely to get HIV in Europe. So they're not coming here to get HIV treatment. But that goes a long way because that's what most people are going to think. And when they see, oh, you're a migrant, what goes into their mind, you're here to access HIV treatment. So even though you are not, and we know it's free, but with that stigma, actually it impacts on people. So it's hard for them to go and access because of that internalized and external stigma. So that's why we're having later presentation for testing because of that stigma. And then when it comes to asylum seekers, LGBT asylum seekers, when they're given accommodation by the Home Office, they are put in rooms, like two people in a room. So you can imagine you're put in a room with somebody else who is not either LGBT, and you don't know there are other situations. So we've had cases whereby there's one of our service users came back in the room, and guess what? The medical, I'll use the word, I'm trying to be a bit politically correct here. Their HIV medication was put on the table by the other roommate. So you can imagine someone getting into your belongings, pick out your HIV medication and put on the table. So what they're trying to communicate to you is that you are a danger to me. So we're getting all that. So this really impacts on LGBT people who are living with HIV. And then there's this issue of financial difficulties. If you're an asylum seeker, you get £37, 75 pence per week. That is if you qualify. So I remember a few months ago, an MP was asked whether he could live on 90 pounds a week, and he said no. Now, they expect asylum seekers to live on £37. So during COVID, we've had people who found it even hard taking their medication because they didn't have food. So it's very hard to buy food and other essentials using £37. And if you're an asylum seeker, most of them are not allowed to work. So your only source of income is that £37 from the government, which is not even, enough.
So
And
go ahead.
do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna move us a little bit towards, I think that we, unfortunately, we could spend sort of all day in a conference talking about various unfortunate things that migrants face, the multiple vulnerabilities that migrants have to encounter. And I think many of, obviously you all are doing that sort of really important work to meet all those needs and to address those vulnerabilities. I think one of the things that I was hoping to be able to also talk about is it's so important for migrants, particularly LGBTQ migrants, to find a sense of community once they've left home and they've come to a new place. So I'm curious how, and the theme for this conference is resiliency. And so obviously the ability to find a community helps with issues of resilience. So I'm curious how migrants are able to, or how your organizations are able to help migrants find a sense of community once they arrive.
If I can address that, Alex, some migrants, when they come to the UK, I'll give an example, say Ugandans, Nigerians, people tend to go to places where Ugandans are. If you're from Uganda, you tend to go to an area where there are Ugandans. So even though you're living in the UK, but again, you are living in that small Ugandan or Nigerian community. And such communities got stigma when it comes to HIV, when it comes to LGBT. So it's really a very big hurdle for you to jump from living from that community in the UK to a wider community where you can access services without being judged. So even though people are living in the UK, but we have to remember we have small communities where people are living because that's where they can access services. Like people can give them accommodation and maybe food. So we have to be mindful that not each and everybody is living in the that bigger community. Some of them are living within those small communities. So getting access to these services is sometimes not easy until because a few weeks ago on my rounds, I met someone who said to me, "Oh, even as I came here, I didn't know that we have these kind of services because at my church they don't talk about this and that."
So community becomes such an important resource for people to understand what's available to them, who's around them. So I'll go to Oscar and then I'm going to come to Jose.
Alex, if I can say something, as organizations, we have to go to the people, not people to come to us. I think that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. Oscar, I know that there have been a few sort of rather encouraging reports coming from the southern border about ways that LGBT folks, particularly trans women, have been able to find a sense of community, have been able to bring themselves together. Tell us a little bit more about that and why it's so important.
Sure. When my partner and I moved back to our hometown area after living in New York, there was still that culture shock for us. And the biggest thing that we realized in 2012 was that there had never been any sort of LGBT pride celebration. So in 2013, we hosted the first one, and 300 people showed up, scared to death that somebody would drive by and shoot them because it was out at a public park. But they showed up. They had fun. It was wholesome family carnival carnes kind of style. The next year it grew to 2,000, then 4. We moved indoors because it was 111 degrees. And now, last year in 2019, we had 15,000 people show up, including abuelitas, grandmothers, kids, friends, and there's a huge sense of community there. For those who are out, for those who are bilingual, it's a lot easier. If you're Spanish monolingual or you speak Portuguese, and you're undocumented, you go back to not having a community. When I say that we're 1.2 million people, it's not one city, it's 32 cities. And it takes like 2 hours plus to commute from one region to the other. The few gay bars that were here, which is where many of us have found community growing up, are all going out of business because of geosocial networking apps, the hookup dating apps. And unfortunately, what we're finding on those is that when the men in particular and our trans Latinas find partners, friends through there, often those relationships include their introduction for the first time to crystal methamphetamine. And so we're then seeing high addiction rates, a high prevalence of high-risk behavior, multiple partners, condomless sex, and then zero conversion. So I wish it was a better outlook, but finding community is getting harder and harder unless you live in a large metropolitan city, and it's very challenging for those who are Spanish monolingual.
And I think, Oscar, to one of those points, I think one of the potential opportunities around finding that people have had success finding community online. And there are, let's say, I think you may have. Thank you. So I think this is a good point to move to Jose and see what, how are folks finding the migrant population?
Of course. So I get that in first time we have said that the Oscar means mention afterly that was that many of the migrants from Venezuela escaped from the lack of attention there because they in this moment there is this ability of HIV and AIDS treatment, but there is not guarantee the integral attention. In this way, many people from there escape to Colombia to get the attention that they need. And also in this way, they suffer the discrimination, they suffer the stigma because they came to cities, and also the frontiers between Colombia and Venezuela are very, very dangerous. And also there's places where the state is differently places because there are many ways like poverty, inequality, and also the lacks of rights and also service. In this way, Red Somos has made a lot of effort to try to fight against the stigma, the xenophobia, the xerophobic, and also guarantee the integration of migrants, especially the LGBT and also the ones who live with HIV and AIDS. In this way, we have made campaigns with with ACNUR, the refugee commissioner from United Nations, and also with A4A and other organizations. For example, the famous one was Somos Panas en Positivo, We Are Panas in Positive. That was a campaign very famous who tried to fight the discrimination about xenophobic and also the seropositive and also we have worked with with health professional and also all the personnel inside in health, in all the people from the frontier, and also in cities like Barranquilla, Cali, Manizales, and other cities from Colombia who receive all the population from migrants. For example, Bogota is the largest city in Colombia and receive many of migrants because they have is very highlight for them because they have labor work and also all their other problem is many people from migrant from Venezuela they are in the work of the sexual work, but many of them they are in the sexual work or in the sexual pay activities for needed because they didn't uh, make the prostitution there in Venezuela because many of them they are professional, but they now when they came to Colombia, there's the only labor that they have to make because there's a very complicated place. In that reason, and other migrants are just in the informal sales and in many subcontract sub-hire labors.
Can I add one quick thing? I promise to make it brief.
We're gonna start to wrap things up, Oscar. So we're gonna. I think this is as I said in the beginning, this is a super complicated, very complex conversation, and we could talk all day about this. I wish that we could talk all day about this. But what I would like to suggest to all of you and to everyone who's watching, one, I want to say thanks to each and every one of you for participating in this panel. It's so important to be able to address these issues. And two, I think that anyone who out there who's watching this who can support the work that each of these organizations are doing is fundamental. And we have to continue advancing the narratives of what migrant LGBTQ people are encountering around the globe, and in particular when we talk about HIV, because we have to continue to shine a light on these very important and complex issues. So I just want to say thanks to the three of you for participating in this, and best of luck in all your work. We'll definitely keep in touch, and I think this can be the first of conversations. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Hornet.
Thank you.